Hello. All right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about going cross-platform with React. The TLDR of this talk is that React isn't something for the web, it's something for everything. That doesn't make sense, but moving on. So I've got a couple, well, just the one. I've got terrible humor, and it's very nerdy and developer-y, so don't mind that. Hugo, you can find me on Twitter at that. There's 2 underscores, but the font doesn't allow to separate it. I love async, and I kind of take it too far. So this is what I call async styling. It's not even done properly, and it's not really async because there's a timeout in there. But that's enough about me. What problem are we talking about? We're talking about cross-platform development because this, right? You've got these 3 options. You make your development fast, you make it cheap, and you have app performance, and you probably have to pick less than 2. The slides are wrong. I'll fix them later. All right? Why do we even care about cross-platform? Quick history lesson. So we started off with corporation-centered design. Money is king. That means your product requirements are going to be things like IE8. That's wrong as well. It should probably be IE6. A desktop app, obviously, and probably a punch card interface. I don't actually remember a time like this, apart from the IE8 part. But now let's look at where design is today. We're all about these products. The user is king, and the product requirements are web, mobile, and desktop, because your user wants to be able to access your stuff from anywhere. So we need 2 to 3 platforms. I don't know how to do desktop, web, and mobile. Does anyone know how to do all 3 to a very good no, probably not. Okay. We've got the usual business solutions. Build 4 apps. Build 1 app. Build 1 app and put it everywhere. The first one, obviously going the native route, making everything native, including compiling really weird binaries from some dark Linux distribution. Then only build a web iOS app. You just do what you know how to do. And finally, the last one is basically you make it for the web and you wrap it in terrible things that do bad things to people's phones. Obviously, these approaches have drawbacks. I wouldn't be here talking to you otherwise. The first one is time versus money versus it's the same thing. So you've got a cost in terms of development time. Second, you've got the business cost in terms of if you've only got an Android app, your iOS users aren't going to be happy and vice versa, and people don't like the web sometimes. Finally, you've got the UX cost. If you've got a hybrid app and it's killing people's phones, it's not a good idea. So that's that. Who do we know that needs to do things fast and cross-platform and performant and does things well? Facebook. They're bloody good at things, I think. They used to have hybrid apps, and then they moved away from it because they realized it was terrible for user experience. They love moving fast and breaking things. I don't know if I agree with that. If I broke everything I built, it'd be a bit of a problem. So next we're going to talk about React. It's a Vue library built by Facebook, so that's why I'm talking about Facebook. It's the V in MVC, so for the people who don't know what MVC is, come to Makers Academy. What's the name? Anyways, I probably got the name wrong, terrible. But the V in MVC is the view layer in the model view controller paradigm. Now, a native JavaScript app, the purists, those Java folks, those Objective-C folks, those Swift folks, the people who spent a lot of time and invested a lot of their time learning something that's quite difficult, would say it's not really native if it's not doing Java or Objective-C for the corresponding platforms, which is Android and iOS. But since we all love JavaScript, we have 3 equal signs because that's how we do it. It doesn't really work there, actually, does it? It's too bad. I'm not really a JavaScript guy. I just do async. So we're going to go with the definition of native code as doesn't run in a web view that drains the battery out of your phone. on a mobile device. Okay? So, native JavaScript app has to be not hybrid, not Java, not Objective-C or Swift in Tiny, because Swift, I mean, who uses that? Why JavaScript? Code reuse, because we're writing everything in JavaScript. Like, you've got NPM, you've got NPM, you've got NPM, and you don't even need to copy-paste other people's code. You can just require it in your code base. Second place reason is because you switch less, right? We're writing universal apps. So why not just take the same universal app and put it straight on a phone? Finally, this is actually a real business concern, is that you have over-the-air updates. So out of the whole talk, this is probably one of the only valid points I have for this, is that if you're building... I've just thought about the sentence I'm about to say, and I'm going to say, if you're building a native JavaScript app, you can update your JavaScript bundle, which basically means it's not native, but it's okay. So you can actually update some of your code base without having to push an update. Let that sink in, let that sink in. You can push an update without updating. With regards to the lovely people at Apple and the Play Store who will take away your reviews when you push a big release of your app. Obviously, everyone's got viral apps here. Now, why React Native is because React. So React solves a problem, is that UIs are a bit difficult to reason about. So it does this thing, which is like this mapping, blah, 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 that UI is a function of state and always is, and it's pure and So now what I'm going to show you is that this is true, which people should bite my head off for because it's not really true. But from my very limited understanding of Android dev, this doesn't compile, but that's irrelevant. So an Android app waits for the app to be loaded from the naming convention. I've extrapolated that from the name of the function. All right, actually, method, sorry, it's Java. Second, you attach a listener handler combo. And third, when the event is fired, boom, handler gets executed. Now, we're familiar with this stuff, right? It sounds a bit like what we do on the web. Wait until something's loaded, attach a listener handler combo, do some weird stuff, and attach, obviously, to the global scope because it's great. State versus UI. Every time my counter changes, I have to go and tell my app, oh, this place needs to be updated because this updated, right? It doesn't really scale. Once you've got 200 places that show the same data, you don't really want to be doing that. So you've got more headaches. Next step, you've got buttons, right? If you can't read, it's not a problem. Basically, the idea is your button is nowhere near to be seen, right? I didn't even need to show you the HTML or the corresponding template to show you the handlers and all that, which is a bit of a problem because we're tightly binding to a particular component in a particular place, but we don't know where it is, all right? So when someone changes it there, they don't necessarily know that, oh, you might need to update the ID somewhere else, right? We've all done this. You get rid of a class and then your JavaScript breaks, right? Yeah. So that doesn't... Okay, so this is a React component. Again, I don't know if this actually works because why do you compile your things? You're giving a talk. You don't need to compile things. Compile, it's JavaScript. Does it run? So you've got your component contains state, all right, which is cool. It's not on the window object, but it kind of is because it's an app and it's within the window. And you've got a declarative UI. So you tell your browser, well, not really. You tell React what you want it to do and not particularly how. So take my word for it, this scales and you've got fewer headaches. You could probably believe the fewer headaches part. I don't know about scaling. Hate that word. So from there, the way we build Android, iOS, and web apps is actually quite similar. So you've got your events, it fires off, you do things, you keep everything in different places and everything breaks just because you forgot to check that other place. So they have the same advantages and drawbacks. And if React can solve it for the web, surely React can solve it for native. So that's actually one of the main reasons Facebook started this whole thing off, is because they got annoyed. They were using this cool thing for their web teams and they couldn't use it for their native teams. So now I'm quoting Ruby guys, great, good. Next thing I'll be quoting like PHP guys. The hardest part of learning iOS development, this is really funny. Obviously the stats are completely arbitrary because the guy just puts this massive pie chart on his slide, and it's basically Objective-C syntax is very easy to learn compared to the iOS API. Who knows Java here? Well, to a certain extent, right? No? Yes? Come on. Everyone who's been to uni somehow has probably seen it. Somehow. Okay, who knows Android? Okay, right? Like, knowing Java and knowing the standard library and knowing how to do things in Java and the syntax has nothing to do with actually making an app. It's a completely different way of thinking and a lot of patterns to learn, a lot of APIs to learn and all that. Second one, I only put this quote in because the guy who says it is the lead on the React Native project, but pretty much he says the tooling is different, the language is different. So you need 3 sets of engineers to do basically the same thing because the architecture is actually pretty much the same. Again, handlers, events, things in files that shouldn't be in different files. So React is actually more about writing native apps in React than it is about writing them in JavaScript. Why? Because the Ruby guys say it, because the PHP guys say it. So it has to be true. They're not really PHP guys. I kind of shot myself in the foot by telling everyone that whatever, but you know. So the API is the bigger deal than the language. This is probably my favorite line of the talk because programming's programming. Who cares what language it's in? So some features, target platform as an implementation detail. You don't worry whether you're writing for the web or whether you're writing for fridges or, you know, you just write your React app. And actually, the development experience is a lot closer to what you'd experience on the web. You've got a Flexbox implementation. You've got objects that look like style sheets. They're objects, obviously they're JavaScript objects, but they actually look very much like your CSS would. It's a subset, but you know. The logic is pretty much reusable unless you're calling native events or whatever you do. And actually, they've polyfilled a bunch of web APIs like XML, HTTP requests, even though you could probably do something to package that in another way. And then there's more. There's the fact that there's some crazy person who decided, oh, React's on the web. Oh, React's not on the web anymore. Oh, let's take back that new React and put it back on the web. So basically, what's happened is they've started running this React Native web project. And pretty much, you use the same kind of interface for Vue. Use the same names and components for the Vue. And it actually doesn't feel weird because you're used to using components in React and not actually dealing with HTML that much. So then it renders to HTML. They make the components map to HTML on the web. And that means you've pretty much got one code base. Obviously, it looks terrible on the web because you've designed it for a tiny phone, but you've done it without any context switching. So if you want to be successful, make hybrid apps. But if you want to be successful with React Native, abuse the high-level components. Okay, any platform-specific code, whether that's events, and actually the names of the components. So don't put divs. If you're writing a React project, write something else. And because if you've got a high-level component that doesn't call anything that needs to render, it's basically just JavaScript. So it's completely portable. So I got into, like, there's all these people saying, don't use JSX styles, it's bad for you. It's true, but we like our CSS, but we're not talking about web development, all right? React is not about being on the web, it's about JavaScript somehow, but does your fridge CSS? Or will it? Will your fridge CSS? That's a bit far-fetched, but you can see where I'm getting to with this. This is a bit closer to home. Does the terminal CSS? No, it doesn't. Is there a React implementation? Well, React blah, blah, blah. Something that you can do to use React to build terminal apps. Is there something that does that? There is actually. So we can't think of React as just something you use CSS with. Next, you get the first GIF of the presentation because, who needs GIFs? And you just profit. You've just made a web, Android, and iOS app in no time. You haven't really. You've probably beaten your face against the wall a couple of times as well. But technically, it's an API you know, and you don't actually have a speed performance trade-off because we're not running web views. Right, I probably should have put that somewhere in the talk. The result, you've got your iOS app, you've got your Android app, and you've got some sort of a web app. So if you want to go I'm not bothered, let's just port it straight back, use React Native Web. So it looks terrible, it looks like you're on a phone when you're not. If you are a bit more bothered and you want to make it for the web, you can reuse a lot of the higher level stuff, like all your logic. All right, so that just means that you could possibly replace a lot of the things by just searching and replacing through your code base, which is my favorite type of development. So obviously you've got other options if you want to use JavaScript or Ruby. Not trolling. I kind of like Ruby. It's nice, right? So you've got native script and accelerator, titanium, and all that stuff if you want to use JavaScript. But again, right, it's not about JavaScript or not JavaScript. I mean, you know what a function is, you know what a loop is, you know what OO is, even though you prefer prototypes. You can probably get away with learning Java if you had to. You can probably get away with learning Objective-C if you had to. That's the big, terrible, not presented well. Language doesn't really matter. The architecture you're using does. If you want to dive in, because this is some dark thing that doesn't really exist anywhere but Facebook have decent guides. And you just Google things. Like, just React Native tutorial. That should sort you out. So there's the checklist. Abuse your high-level components. Use JSX styles. Profit. This is actually not so much a React Native thing. It's more of a maybe the way people, the Facebook guys re-implemented that for native means that we should do this in our everyday React development, right? So the whole high-level components and JSX, right? Possibly if they come up with React Fridge in 5 years' time, it might be useful to have done this from the get-go. So I'm going to thank the React contributors for making awesome things, and Elnug for hosting. If you want to get in touch, I'm Hugo, and Artificial are looking for developers, PHP probably, but, you know, developers are developers, so whatever, all right? Yeah. And don't ask questions, it's probably going to turn really bad if you do have any questions. Good, no questions, I like it. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.